Our final clip has to do with the link alluded to in the previous segment between Roger Hollis in his first 10 or 12 years at MI5 and the super agent of Soviet military intelligence, Ursula Kuczynski, codenamed SONIA, who lived and worked in England and in close proximity to MI5's officers at Blenheim during the Second World War. There are a number of components to this. You have in front of you a map which, as you can see, is quite detailed. Once again, what I want to do is step through the top level architecture of this in order to draw your attention in common to fundamentally what we've got. You will then be in a position, if you have questions, to go down any one of these nodes in front of you and pinpoint where you would most want some clarification. I won't step through all those details right now. But I think once we go through the very top levels, it'll start to become clear, as with the earlier maps, that there is, to say the least, a case to answer here. So the contention is that SONIA, in terms of what we know about her and her operations, points to Hollis. Let's just step through the very top level. We know, beyond dispute, that SONIA, Ursula Kuczynski, was a communist from the 1920s and that she was in Shanghai and was at the latest recruited by the GRU while in Shanghai, in the early 1930s. We know that Roger Hollis was there at the same time. Now, the mere fact that they were both in Shanghai at the same time doesn't in itself offer any particular signal, but consider the following. Hollis is known to have befriended Agnes Smedley while he was in Shanghai. Now, Agnes Smedley was herself, for years after that, a GRU agent of some considerable note. She was also a very close friend at that time in Shanghai of SONIA. She was also the mistress of Richard Sorger, who ran a very famous GRU spy network, first in Shanghai and then in Tokyo. So it isn't just a matter of knowing Smedley, but at one degree of separation, therefore being linked to very important GRU agents. Was Hollis aware of that? Was conversation about the GRU, was possible recruitment to the GRU undertaken at that time? We don't know. We know that he doesn't figure in the Shanghai police files at that time where many of the other figures do. However, by his own admission, he did befriend Agnes Smedley. He also befriended ELLI, who went on to become very much a pro-communist and lived out his life, in fact, in Mao's China and Beijing. And there are what appear to be credible reports that while in China, he visited Beijing, and in Beijing, on a number of occasions, met Arthur Hewitt, who was a very prominent Comintern intelligence operative. Now, it's possible that the reason he didn't come to the attention of the Shanghai police is because his recruitment didn't take place in Shanghai, possibly in Beijing. We also know that twice during his stay in China, Roger Hollis returned from China via Moscow or to Europe from China via Moscow, let's say either way, and stayed in each case in Moscow for a number of days. So there's a good deal of circumstantial evidence that if Hollis was to become Agent ELLI, it could very well have been in China that he was first groomed and possibly recruited. And what we find is that subsequent to that, his career and that of SONIA overlapped in striking ways. So this is our first indicator. Secondly, and consistent with that, we know that shortly after MI5 was moved from London to Blenheim, outside Oxford, during the Blitz in the Second World War, SONIA, who was by then definitely working for the GRU in Geneva, was posted to Britain and moved straight to a place just outside Oxford. You can see on the little diagram here that they're putting up where she was in relation to Blenheim and in relation to Oxford. And what this meant was that during that crucial period, she was ideally placed physically to service dead drops if ELLI was delivering material to her, whoever ELLI was. And we know that Hollis was during that period at Blenheim with most of his colleagues. We also know that in his subsequent capacity in the second part of the war, although he had moved back to London, he regularly visited Blenheim because the registry was there and he did nuclear security work going back and forth to Oxford. So the fact that SONIA was posted there at that time and to that particular spot and that Hollis was there adds another brick to this suspicion that he's our man, and that at the very least he needs to be put under the microscope in this respect. The third consideration, already touched upon, but crucial to this, is nuclear espionage. We know that SONIA was the courier for nuclear spies, most notably Klaus Fuchs, until he was handed over to the KGB later in the war. And she was based at that time near Oxford, while he was in Britain. Now, the question is, how does this link with Hollis? Well, Hollis was the man who cleared Klaus Fuchs, not once, but multiple times. Cleared him without qualification, though knowing of his communist background, and omitted mention in reports to the United States of Fuchs's communist background, even though the FBI wanted to know of any such person. Do they have a communist background? Are there any reasons for concern? So once again, we have this neat little circle. If in fact Hollis was ELLI, given that he was at Blenheim and covering nuclear security, and SONIA was right there, and given that she was the courier for nuclear material, sending it to the JO in Moscow, could it be that he was passing material to her? Well, yes, of course, it could be. And in the overall pattern of events, if we want to argue that somebody other than Hollis was playing this role, we need a pretty compelling candidate, because we don't have another one who was covering nuclear security. We don't have another one who knew Sonia's circle in Shanghai. We don't have another one who passed through Moscow a couple of times. We don't have another one who fits any of the descriptions of ELLI by Kuczynski. Finally, the question of the protective hand, which we've touched on before. SONIA herself writes a memoir saying, "I felt protected inside MI5. There have been hints in other GRU memoirs of recent years, well after the Cold War, that there was this protective hand for SONIA inside MI5. And what we know is that Roger Hollis was in fact, throughout the 1940s, protecting SONIA from surveillance, from suspicion, from interrogation on repeated occasions. You have the map before you. I won't step through that detail now in this oral presentation, but I want you to consider that if you take any one of these claims in isolation, it might be that there are grounds for saying, oh, well, that's circumstantial or that's not conclusive. What we have to do is see them, first of all, together, concatenated, and secondly, to look at them in the light of our early maps, which established beyond reasonable dispute that there was a mole, that's not imaginary, that the prime suspect has always been Roger Hollis, that's a matter of record, and that the cover story, if you will, the counter-argument that it was Leo Long appears to have no foundation. When you look at these considerations in that light, and we know the story about SONIA being such a high-level military intelligence analyst or courier, what I want to suggest to you is that we have the makings of a strong indictment of Roger Hollis. In the other maps you have in the report, you'll see how this is fleshed out. I want to now open the floor to questions, because at a first pass we need to say what in any of this strikes you as implausible. Where are your most immediate questions? Where would you want to see the inquiry taken further? That's the real purpose of this forum, and that's what I want to now open the floor to. Thank you.